Welcome, adventurers, to this comprehensive endgame guide for Pax Dei. In this video, we'll be launching our first round of community tools, starting with maps of each of the 16 dungeons that I hope will help make the most of your time when out adventuring. We'll also cover dungeons, equipment, spell loadouts, group composition, techniques, and finally discussing the maps I've just mentioned here. For ease of navigation, this video is broken up into chapters, which will be listed in the description below. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Defining end game in an early access game like Pax Dei can be tricky. However, without certain PvP elements in place, the current end game centers around exploring and completing dungeons in order to obtain rare and useful magical items. These magical items can give you an edge in your adventures, whether in PvP or out exploring the world. There are 16 dungeons, with 4 in each of the settled provinces. Getting to dungeons outside of your home province can take 45 minutes to 2 hours of travel time, so proper planning is crucial to make the most of your time. It's a good idea before your scheduled run to send out a scout to find the most optimal route and avoid any potential hiccups. It's also important to highlight the hidden backdoor entrances to 12 of these dungeons. While some serve only as entrances and exits, others serve both purposes. Exploring each one can save you those crucial hours of preparation time. While some dungeons are smaller and less challenging, it's wise to come properly equipped for any scenario. Higher tier gear, like Transitional Plate within the 200 defense soft cap, will greatly increase your survival chances. But much of Pax Dei's content can be completed with Jack of Plate armor, combined with budded chainmail, and enhanced with various magical items, which I'll mention shortly. In future videos, I will be unveiling tools that will make determining proper loadouts a more intuitive process. One thing we wish we'd known earlier is how much better the reinforced buckler is compared to the T2 and T3 Viking shields. It offers a higher block rating and significantly better durability. Our tanks found that they use just under half as many reinforced bucklers as they did Viking shields. We also found it beneficial for non-tank roles to bring shields and have a semi-decent block skill level of about 20. This way, if anything goes wrong or the tank loses aggro, a player can block incoming damage to help mitigate as much as possible, providing the tank, heals, and DPS an opportunity to recover. This brings me to my next point. Bring multiple weapons and shields, and also double and triple check your gear's durability before setting off on your adventure. I cannot stress enough how much time a broken item can waste if the group has to find a nearby town for repairs. Speaking of weapons, there is some flexibility in choice, but a few key takeaways are worth mentioning. Weapons enchanted with hurt, like the Sign Divining Mace and Examiner's Great Maul, can make all the difference, with higher tier versions performing even better. When multiple players use these maces, along with their Slam Stun ability and the tank's Shield Slam to maintain aggro, the hurt effect occasionally procs on hit, inflicting even more stuns on the enemy, effectively stun locking them, which is indicated by a twinkling light. The two-handed variant also deals quite a bit of damage when in skilled hands. One-handed spears with their faster attack speed can provide higher DPS, provided the wielder has the skills to support it. We've also experimented with swords that have the Ira Bene effect, with varying levels of success. This raises questions about the Ira Bene's overall utility in dungeon runs. It's also important to bring at least one bow for pulling enemies. We'll cover pull methods later in the video. For spells, Mesmerize and Pilgrim's Fire are essential. The damage that can be dealt on an initial pull with 4 to 5 people casting synchronous fireballs cannot be overstated. Mesmerize provides a level of crowd control and is even more effective when coupled with Haunting Memories. Our group doesn't typically run with the Pacify spell since we don't really find the need for it with the strategies we outline here. In terms of healing, it doesn't hurt to run multiple instances of Radiant Mend, a spell that provides a burst heal to multiple players in a 20-meter radius. When utilized and coordinated properly, 3 players running Radiant Mend can provide essential support and keep the group alive, meaning all the difference between a wipe and potentially being unable to retrieve your gear in a successful dungeon run. For the tank's aggro management, we found that a combination of Fury, Consecrate Ground 2, and Shield Slam not only helped maintain threat, but also provided resistances that make some of the enemies easier to deal with. Fury is a spell that deals damage in a conic direction with the same range as Pilgrim's Fire, drawing aggro of enemies to the caster and generating stamina for each enemy hit by the spell. Consecrate Ground 2 is significantly stronger than the Tier 1 variant, providing several resistances a heal over time, and generating a good deal of aggro for each player healed within its range. On the topic of resistances, this is a great time to discuss the best consumables to bring. Given the nature of the enemies you'll encounter, high-tier consumables that offer strong resistances to poison and fire, along with a larger stamina pool, are essential for a successful dungeon run. There are a few different combinations that can be used with varying degrees of success, but we've settled on a mixture of elderberry and rosehip syrup, washed down with some grape spirits. While this combo only provides an additional 100 max health and 90 max stamina, it offers a whopping 136 poison defense and 66 fire defense, which, when coupled with Consecrate Ground 2, makes dealing with some of the more dangerous enemies a breeze. Another combination favored by one of our tanks is high stamina and health foods, such as Kara's Cider, Bold Winter Stout, and Nice Bear Stew. It's also worth bringing higher level potions. We found the tier 3 healing potions invaluable for recovering from potential runaway situations. This area is open to experimentation, and I'd love to hear what combinations of consumables work best for you and your team. Enemies in these dungeons are both numerous and dangerous. You'll face stronger Zebium cultists and imps, with the biggest threat being the various Zebium cultist spellcasters. These spellcasters deal massive poison damage and have lifesteal, with the amount of life stolen depending on the number of players affected. In instances where our groups have nearly wiped was often due to a spellcaster getting away from us. It is crucial to either keep the spellcaster crowd controlled with Mesmerize or nuke them down as fast as possible with overwhelming DPS. Other cultists, such as the Maulers, can pack a punch, but proper equipment should keep their damage within a manageable range. Aside from the cultists, imps can swarm in large numbers, and their fire-based attacks can trigger the on-fire effect, which deals significant damage over time. Imps do have smaller health pools than the cultists. They should be relatively easy to burn down quickly before causing too many problems for your group. Plague beasts, such as infected boars, are another threat to watch out for. These enemies have large health pools and deal massive damage that inflict a poison debuff. It's important to cast an initial healing spell when fighting enemies with poison to mitigate the damage over time as much as possible. A successful dungeon run not only hinges on your equipment and knowledge of enemies, but organization and communication of your team. We found that a group composition of 1 or 2 tanks, along with someone with a bow to pull, is almost essential. Equipping everyone with some degree of fire damage, heal, crowd control, or all of the above gave us a certain flexibility that we couldn't afford with specialized team compositions such as designated healer, caster, melee, and ranged DPS. We have found that the lower the gear quality of the team, the larger the team would need to be. If you are only equipped with leather armor and chainmail, you will be hard-pressed to find much success with even 15 people fighting in that dungeon. However, with a refined loadout, you could potentially find success with 5 to 6 people, and even less in some cases. If you are familiar with MMOs, you might recognize the pull techniques outlined here. Pulling is done when the player who is designated to pull the enemies brings them back to the rest of the group. This allows time for crowd control, initial fireball DPS, and keeping the range of melee players far enough from the enemies that crowd control is not disrupted. It is also a good idea to place consecrated ground in your designated battlefield so that you can fight the enemy on your terms and be supported by increased resistances and heals. Of the pull methods, there are a few that you can adapt, each with their own pros and cons. The face pull is exactly what it sounds like. The tank runs up to the enemy or group of enemies and attracts aggro by getting in their personal space. This pull method is very risky and should only be done with sufficient equipment and backup from heals and crowd control to mitigate the initial burst of damage that will be placed upon the tank. The arrow pull is one of the most reliable pull methods where either another player or the tank themselves switches to a bow and pulls the enemy. This works well in a couple of ways, where enemies have to close the gap with the person who pulls to deal damage to them, giving a larger response window for the rest of the group. However, it is important to note that ranged pulls such as this will not counteract sniping from spellcasting enemies. The fireball pull is possibly the least reliable method due to a glitch that causes fireballs to not actually damage the enemy. However, this can be somewhat mitigated with a large number of fireballs launched by several players at once. One thing we like to do is count down from 3 to ensure that everyone is able to use Pilgrim's Fire at the same time. This not only provides a huge burst in DPS, but you only need 2 fireballs to trigger the on fire debuff, which causes massive damage over time. The crowd control pull is a great method to use when the group of enemies you're pulling contains one or more spellcasters. This pull is when one or multiple players with Mesmerize coordinate to start the fight by casting Mesmerize on specified targets. This pull minimizes the amount of enemies the group will need to contend with at once, but the pullers will need to make sure to refresh the Mesmerize before the spell wears off. The Fury pull is when a tank utilizes the Fury spell to pull a large group. This pull method has the same range of Pilgrim's Fire and draws aggro to the caster for the duration of the effect. This pull is an effective way to top off stamina for the tank and ensure that enemies stay in line. However, it is important to have heals ready for the tank as they will undergo a massive burst of initial damage. Like other ranged pulls, this pull can be problematic when dealing with ranged enemies, especially those that remain close enough to another group of enemies where charging them would risk a face pull. The line of sight pull is one that is typically used to close the gap with ranged enemies without pulling the rest of the dungeon. It involves retreating back to a specified location and placing something such as a wall between you and the enemy. This breaks line of sight with the enemy and forces them to put you in their sight so that they can target you, giving your team an opportunity to ambush. When using these methods, keep in mind that enemies are on a respawn timer of approximately 18 minutes with some variation of reliability. This means that if you are too slow on the advance, you will need to keep an eye behind you to ensure that you do not accidentally have backspawns being aggroed and potentially wiping the team. As long as you keep a consistent pace, this should not be a major issue, but it's good to not stay in one place for too long unless your intent is to farm specific enemies. Now that you know how to equip yourselves and what to expect, let's equip you with a tool that will make your experience in the depths one that is coherent and makes sense. I spent over 112 hours meticulously mapping each of the 16 dungeons to give you an idea of the overall shape of each dungeon and also to assist you in navigating its various twists, turns, and dead ends, which I hope will give you a better visual of which areas you have explored already and which stones are still left unturned. These maps are still very much a work in progress, and I am looking to collaborate with others to not only refine them over time, but also provide even greater detail that contains enemy and special enemy spawn locations, loot areas, and other important information that will no doubt make dungeons a more enjoyable experience for you. These maps will be made available on a Google Drive file, which I have linked in the description below. This and more community tools will be made available by our team, so make sure to stick around because we are hard at work on them and I look forward to presenting them to you. If you found this video useful, then stay tuned because this channel will be the go-to channel for updates, guides, tips and tricks, and generally all things Pax Dei. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay dapper, stay classy, stay clean, and stay fresh. We'll catch you next time.